Welcome, everyone, to our latest First Fridays. This is going to be happening, of course, every Friday or every first Friday of the month. And what we're doing this time around is something rather unique. We have a series that we've been focusing on media relations during a disaster. Today, specifically, we'll be zeroing in on that first 48 hours after landfall. Now, just as a quick introduction and reminder to everyone, yes, every month on the first Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. Hawaii time is when we'll be setting this up. Location of this is always going to be on Teams because this is open to participants from across the region and really across the Red Cross. I would love to get some other guest speakers in here from other regions just to kind of get a different perspective. We'll be having that coming up in due time. And why we do this is I would really like to have everybody trained up to be comfortable and confident when in any way approached by the media, specifically by the media, but also to give a better idea of what communications the role is within both blue sky and gray sky situations. And of course, it's always a chance to network as well. Now, I'm excited about this one because you'll notice that it's actually not just my face plastered all over this like normal. So we'll run through our little opening introduction here. And yes, I'm going to explain the first 48 hours after impact and a little bit about the very straightforward rules as far as this is what's expected, this is what we would like, et cetera, et cetera. But a bulk of today's show, I really am excited to bring on Marty Moran. He is going to be giving us some of his experience with the flow of information and communication during a disaster right as it hits. And then, of course, we'll wrap it all up. And I believe we've got some time built in as well for questions. And of course, if at any time you have some questions that you just want to jump in, can't wait, or you don't want to forget them, post those up in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. All right, so here's the scenario. Back on July 1st, we took a look at the first 3 to 5 days leading into a storm. That's when we had the warning. We were very fortunate in that sense to actually have a heads up about a disaster and how we need to take advantage of that opportunity if it's provided. Today, we'll be zeroing in on those first 48 hours after initial landfall. September 2nd, we are going to be talking about communications and the flow of information throughout the duration of the disaster response. And then on October 7th, we'll discuss the wind down and the aftermath. So, of course, I always invite anybody with experience in any of those areas to please reach out. I would love to feature your story. So here we go. This is me jumping into kind of the facts and figures, the rules of what's expected of us by the Red Cross. Uh, Again, I have to make a confession. I've been with this organization for about 2 years now, which means a lot of you are more experienced than I am in disaster response. And it's one of the reasons why I definitely wanted to have Marty on to give his firsthand experience because mine is rather limited. So anything that I sneak in here that's not a strict, this is what's expected, is based on my limited experience. So here we go. We discussed a little bit last time, once again, the idea of preparing and taking advantage of having foreknowledge of any kind of a disaster. Now, certain things will happen rather automatically, and that's can be considered the gray sky command structure. If you're not familiar with the term, gray sky just refers to any time the Red Cross is responding to a disaster, blue sky being when everything's fine and no disaster present. So, gray sky command structure, as I'm sure you know, has a complete shift as far as structure, who reports to who, and how things need to be done. I'm not going to go into all of that here because that is an entirely different class, and most of you already know that and are at least somewhat familiar with it. If not, we can direct you towards the right class for that. But I do want you to keep a very close watch out for who the key players are when it comes to your role in it, And I'm going to be speaking predominantly from a communications point, but this can be carried over into any role. Know who the directors are and know who your points of contact are. This is very important. You want to make those connections as soon as possible. Understand those will be a constantly shifting and a constant moving target, but do your best to keep track of everyone that you are going to be going to and touching base with the most. And I don't just mean the gray sky command structure. Of course, you want them, but I mean everybody else who might be coming across your path. This is going to be, and we'll talk about this, other aid organizations and government points of contact, all of these people, very important. And then, of course, the media. You're going to want to make sure that you get out in touch with them as soon as possible, just so that they know who you are and just so that they get used to seeing your name pop up on their phone or whatever it might take. Now, you can do that again, as far as, pardon me, as far as knowing who your points of contact are. Make sure you keep that list, but then you're going to have to go like one step beyond that. It's always a good idea, just for your own knowledge, find out who the other major players are that maybe, you know, are in completely different lines of service or in helping out in a completely different way. I know everybody's looking to stay in their lane, but in our effort to get to yes, at the very least, we need to know who else is out there and who can be directed towards for, their specialty for them to handle. Now, in that initial impact, there is a strong need for pictures and video to be taken. This is not a huge ask anymore because everybody obviously has that on their cell phone. The purpose is that we want to collect as much B-roll as possible, and we want to catch as much just content, period, that we can then use to tell our story later on. Now, of course, I do need to make the caveat. Only do this if it is safe to do so. And I want to put that up there because I'm sure many of us have seen on television the whenever you watch the news, you'll see that one anchor who is just sick to death of having to announce that during a tsunami, please don't be in the water. It's just that thing. So here we go. Only if it is safe to do so. If you can, while everybody is hunkered down and the storm is passing, have your phone up to a window, that's totally fine. But never, ever, ever obviously put yourself in any kind of a risk or situation like that. The other reason why we do this is that we need to have content up within 3 hours of impact. And what that is that is information posted, preferably pictures and videos. We'll get into what those exactly mean, but it is absolutely critical that we do that. It sets the tone. It shows that we have an immediate response and we're not there simply reacting to it. We're being proactive in our response. It's an absolutely critical thing that we need to do. So within those first 3 hours, we need to have content available to us that's up. So if you find yourself in a sheltering position and you're working there, if you can take a quick video, always send that to a communications person, send it to me. If it, for whatever reason, isn't me, I will get it to the person it needs to get to. But it is absolutely critical that we have that. Once you start gathering this information, it's going to be an absolute flood of information that comes in, and we need to know how to prioritize everything. So first up, visual media is king. It is also queen and prince and princess. It is everything. So what we want to do is make sure that just about everything that we put out there is accompanied by something that shows that we are a part of what is happening right now. It's an intention getter, and it also serves as a proof. Now, The impact of the storm to begin with is going to work as like a proof of seriousness. Again, going back to that idea of, if there's a tsunami, some fool's going to be out in the water, and we want to make sure that everybody understands. A lot of times, people, uh, especially now, it's been so long since a storm has truly hit and impacted Hawaii. I know that's not the case for the rest of our region, but for Hawaii, it's been a while since we've been truly impacted by a major storm. So a lot of times people aren't prepping nearly as much as they should. So if it hits one island and they see that seriousness, maybe before it hits their island, they will actually get on the ball and do a little bit more to protect themselves and their family. This is also going to serve as B-roll, both locally and nationally. This is absolutely critical. Um, it is, again, a way that we can make the media's job easier. It's a way that we can more effectively tell our story. And both of those things that mean that the community gets information better, at a higher quality and faster, quite often. Now, once that initial impact hits, we're showing the severity of the storm. The next evolution of that is going to go into Red Cross response. And in that first 48 hours, a lot is going to happen in a very short amount of time. With luck, it will be an hour, a couple hours, whatever it means, of the storm rolling through your area and then moving on. If that's not the case, of course, you extend that the storm impact level until that is through, and then you move on to the Red Cross response. But do so as quickly as possible, and then start showing as much as possible. So make sure that you get that all the shelter information. There are people, like I said, who might not have believed that this storm was going to be nearly as bad as, oh wow, suddenly I see it. It's real. Where were those shelters again? Make sure to keep that basic information up to date. Show the activities in shelter. If you if you show a family being shown to their area, that's wonderful. If you show somebody with specific medical needs to their area, that's wonderful. It answers a lot of questions before they even need to be asked. And again, that information is conveyed to the community faster, more efficiently. To do this, we use both traditional and social media. Of course, we have the greatest control over social media, and we can put out the most information that way. So that's what we lean on. Announce any important changes as soon as they happen. Make sure that you have uh, value in every messaging that you post. And what I mean by that is we can put up a graphic that says, shelters located at boom, 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 boom. And that's great. That's what we're looking for. We don't want it to just be visually catching. We want to make sure that we're providing actual information, because while we do want eyes on, while we do want the media attention, we do want the story told. That will take a secondary role always to making sure that people are safe. And from a communications aspect, this is how we keep people safe. I never want to be in a situation like it scares me that it could happen this way. I never want to be in a situation where somebody did not know about a shelter and couldn't get to one because they did not have access to that information. We want to make sure that's out there. So make sure that value is paired up with anything that you post visually, whether that is a picture, a video, or a graphic. We'll use like the alert and the warning graphics a lot because obviously those are visually arresting and get people's attention as well. At this point, I also want to harken back to what we talked about last month, remembering to only put verified information on an external level. So that would be the social media, that would be traditional media, anything along those lines. Always vet your sources. Take a look at who is posting this information. If you can get it from a couple of different sources, even better, but always go for that verified information. Social media, traditional media, anything like that, there's absolutely no place for a rumor mill or planning or ideas and, spitballing theories in those circles. Do not allow that to happen. Now, for traditional media, this first 48 hours, that's going to be, I hesitate to use the word easy, but relatively easy in that they come to you. Obviously, they want to have their wall-to-wall coverage. They want to know how people are being helped. They will be contacting you, whether that means your communications officer and they're calling you up to schedule an interview, whether that means they're a reporter that's walking up to the door of a shelter and they see you and they grab you and ask you a question. Whatever that might be, they come to you. It is easier that way. They want the story, which means that you can craft the message, you can make it however you need to make it. This is an easy way to do it. So remember that and take control of the situation. And since we're jumping in and talking about traditional media and social media, I want to then move on to crafting the message. Internal information versus external information. And we talked about this a lot last month. Internally, always be aware that your points of contact are going to change. They could change very quickly, or it could just be shift changes, whether that's a daily shift change or whether that's, okay, this person's been here for X number of days, they need to be off or they're shipping back home, whatever it might be. Be aware that your points of contact will change. So that dovetails into give as much info as you receive, if not more. So make sure those lines of communication are open and being used constantly. I'm going to get into this more a little bit later, but there will be times when you will be pressured and you will be pressuring other people. It happens. Just be aware of that. Document what's going on, what the Red Cross is doing for later requests. In those first 48 hours, there's a lot that happens, and we can't tell all those stories, and we can't make everything happen as fast as it needs to. But there's a wealth of material there. So if you just document it in some way, if you see somebody saying, "Oh, thank you so much. We only got here because we heard that this place was pet friendly," whatever it might be, make sure that you get their name, take a quick picture of them, whatever that might be, so that we can come back to them later. Relay all of the disaster response comms to the regional team within reason. Now, I say it like that because the regional team is not necessarily going to be the same as the disaster communications team. Like I said, the command structure will change and roles get reassigned in gray skies. So always keeping the local regional people up to date on any information that's going on, even if it's just big picture and specific points of interest, that will go a long way, because media relations and points of contact can change from regional to gray sky, and they need to be shared. When going through external information, speed is best. The information flow needs to happen very quickly in those first 48 hours, but accuracy is required. I have no problem with you delaying that information going out if it requires an additional 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it might be, to make sure that that information is verified. And again, I put this reminder, only shared confirmed details of the response. Don't put anything like, we're planning on doing X, Y, and Z. Your messaging, however you frame that, whether you're speaking to someone while you're working in a shelter or whether you're doing an interview that's been pre-set up, scheduled, and you're at home or at the studio even, it should reflect face-to-face response. Now, I'm sure many of you know that if you've been out there and part of a disaster response, that is one of the key components to any level of response, is that care and compassion. Putting that information out into the world through the media and the storytelling, that is no different. It's a lot easier to just kind of bullet point lay it out there, and then move on. That's not what we need to do. We do need to set this up as a story, because all of this is designed to make people understand that it's a very real situation and that very real things are being done and that people are at the heart of it. Work with the media as much as possible, but be mindful of boundaries, internal and external. Internally, this is going to require a lot of schedule balancing. You're going to find out that some people, find out when they're available to do any kind of an interview. And then, of course, if they've been doing too much stuff, give them a break. Externally, consider it like a job interview. You are interviewing the media as much as the media is interviewing you. If you get the sense that a media outlet is simply being too pushy, is being basically broadcasting a wrong message, anything along those lines, you are well within your right to be like, can you talk to, like, deflect them, send them to me, send them to whoever you might need. Or if you're the person in charge, you have that right to be like, I'm sorry, but I can't do this right now. Please come back later, whatever it might be. But you are not beholden to the media and the communications in that sense. You are beholden to the Red Cross and the clients that we serve. Okay. Now, at this point, I see that we have a hand raised. What's up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say you have questions in a one chat, and someone was also raising their hand.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me address the chat question first. What about client confidentiality? We've gone over this a couple of times, and it's a great question. What that is I'm sure that if you have experience in any form of disaster response, especially if you're working with sheltering and everything like that, there are guidelines in place. What I want to make sure that I tell you is do not let any of our clients appear on camera while in our shelter without their express permission. Make sure that they agree to whatever they appear on. That is absolutely critical. If there is anybody for any reason who's like, I do not want to be on either I do not want to be on video or I do not want to be in a picture, nothing, then we need to respect that. The best way to handle that is that if someone comes in and says, hey, I've got a question, can I talk to you? And lead them to a part of the shelter where that isn't filled with clientele. Maybe it's near the front where we just have our signage. Maybe it's a side room, whatever that might take. Or if you have, an empty cot, have that be in the background and just make sure that that's what's available. That's not a bad thing at all, because you can read that one of two ways. The negative way would be like, oh man, they're not, this place is empty. That's not good, but it also means that there's still room. People can come down. It all depends on how you spin that message. So yes, just a real quick synopsis, that's what client confidentiality needs to be. Make sure that there is express permission before you allow the media to see anybody. Now, that it can only be enforced inside of our shelters. So if someone's standing outside, we cannot control that. Once they get inside, that's when our client confidentiality enforcement kicks in. Okay. Any other questions before I turn things over to our guest? I have been talking for far too long. It is now my absolute pleasure to bring on Marty Moran, our Hawaii Island Program Manager. He has a wealth of experience in disaster response, so I wanted to make sure that he could share some of his stories and expertise with you this evening. Marty, I turn things over to you. Marty, you there? Hey, there you are.
Anyhow, let me go up and I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint.
All right.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what you said. we'll talk a little bit about, I've got some stories about different events, but basically the one thing I will, caveat I will give up front, and this is based upon experience, is you want to get shots if you can, but understand you must be sympathetic to the people. My condo was hit during the 2011 tsunami, and I had people in there who I didn't know who they were or what they were doing, taking pictures. And as a victim of a tsunami, I can tell you that you better be very careful when you're taking photos of damage, because you're actually you're entering probably a point in the lives of these people that is the most critical for them, at least at that point in time. Anyhow, with that said, I'm going to try to share my screen. And if you can tell me that you see the owl, we're ready to go. We see the owl. Do you see the owl plus the slides or just the owl?
We see the owl and the slides.
All right, well, we'll fix that. We'll go over here to the slideshow and we'll bring it up. Okay, hold on here. And we'll start from the beginning. And now you should see just the owl.
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, I'm happy to be here. The question, Marty, who and why is he doing this? I am the DPM for Hawaii, but that's not my background in Red Cross. Just to give you an idea, I have been with the Red Cross since 2001. I have been deploying with the Red Cross since 2003. I have been deployed over 30 times. I have been on the ground for 10 actual landfalls of hurricanes, including Katrina and Harvey. And I have spent over 3 years since 2003 of my life on the mainland working on national disasters. I was reserved for 6 years. And what I did was I am in life safety asset protection, which is the safety and security people. I'm a manager, which is high as you can go in that activity. I'm also the national subject matter expert. So if you go on a DRO and you have a question about safety and security, you don't go to the job director because he won't know. He's focused other places. But if you're the manager, you go to the LSAP manager. If the LSAP manager doesn't know, he picks up the phone and calls me. So that's what I have done for over 20 or 19 years. Anyhow, so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about that first 48 hours. And for anybody that knows Brad Kaiserman, he's the Vice President of Operations and Logistics, and he has a favorite saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And this is true of the Red Cross. We plan, we have metrics, we have things we know, we can tell where it's coming, where it's going, how much the wind is, and the like. And we make and respond to the disaster at the very beginning based upon that. But, good example, it's 5:15 in the afternoon on Sunday, and this is your first contact with the enemy. What you see here is the devastation done by a EFF 5 tornado that went through Joplin, Missouri, was 1 mile wide and 9 miles long. And this operation started with the local response. One of the things that's going to be key in dealing in the first 48 hours as communicators is understanding that there is a process here, and it won't seem like it at times. It'll seem like things are just kind of crawling along. Where is everybody? Well, remember, the first response is a local response. If you had an event on my island right now that was just happened, I'd be working to get probably 10 people out, and I might be operating with 10 or 12 people for 24 hours. It just depends. The lava is a good example where we were able to ramp up 2 shelters. We had 6 people working, and the rest of our volunteers came in as they could, but it isn't like there's just this huge manpower. So This has been said often. In the first 48 hours of disaster, by what is going on around you, you would think that the Red Cross had never done this before. But I will stand by this quote, because what happens is during the first 48 hours, no matter what planning we have done, no matter where we are, the situation is fluid and we are not there. We're not prepared to take care of everybody. We will tell everybody we are, but the fact of the matter is it's being implemented. And you have to have a good concept of what's going on behind the scenes to know that, yeah, you know, somebody comes to you and says, well, you're not doing this. And you have to be able to say, we will be doing that. We are working on it, but we have to get the things in place. So basically, what you don't have at the beginning is you don't have the people. You see there with we got one Red Cross volunteer in a huge shelter, but you might be one of only 5 people there. We don't have the Red Cross equipment, especially here on the islands. We don't have the Red Cross equipment because we don't have IRVs. There's not 16 chapters bordering on us that can put people on the road and get them here. So the Red Cross on this island, for the first 48 hours, we're pretty much on our own. And then finally getting the people there from the outside. And anybody's been on a national disaster, you know, they start pouring in, but it takes a while. This is a table of organization for a standard disaster level 5 to level 7. Level 5 is the highest normal Red Cross event, and the level 6 and 7 are called catastrophic. Now, if you take a look at this, every one of those boxes represents just a leadership position, a manager. And if you were to take the numbers down and push them down, for example, I'm over in life safety asset protection, which is over on logistics down there. On a normal job like Harvey, I had 20 people eventually in Houston. I had 4 in Dallas, 4 in Austin, 6 in Corpus Christi, and 5 in Beaumont, Texas. So we're actually at the beginning trying to move these numbers of people there. And that in itself is a major operation. We're set up to handle it, but we start from zero. We start from those 5 volunteers on the island, and we move them into doing as much as they can. We start moving people down from other islands. But that first 48 hours, it's a game of catch up. Why planning goes wrong? Well, first of all, you have anticipated events like hurricanes and floods. We know they're going to come. We know they're going to get there. But on my island, I might work with the county and they'll turn around and say, okay, we're going to open 4 shelters. And we get all the people to open those 4 shelters. Storm comes ashore, doesn't come ashore where we figured on it. Stuff's not in place. We get power goes down and things like that. So we're always responding with the planning, but at the same time, we have to be able to adapt. Even more so with spontaneous natural events. Lava erupts is a good example, tornadoes, floods. In those cases, we are faced with something that 10 minutes ago didn't exist. And now we're trying to marshal our people and get them out there, get the equipment out there and the like. And when you take a look at an operation that's going to go to 700 people or 2,000 people, and for the first 2 days, you're handling it with 25 people, you can see what happens and why the planning goes wrong. We're not bad at it. We're just in a place where we have to adapt. And then finally, you have your spontaneous events, man-made, such as mass casualty and airplane crashes. And they have their own special set of rules and regulations and things like that. Also, these tend to have another factor in them, and that's usually that there's a criminal aspect or an investigation that goes with it, which means we have a different role than just providing for the clients. We have our legal role is to provide for the families of victims of mass casualties and air crashes. And so we never know how many that is. On the islands here, could be as few as 10, could be many, many, many people. Anyhow, so when you're dealing with the media, in most cases they're sympathetic to us. but you're going to get one of them or other who's saying, well, why aren't you? And I caution you, I'm trying to give you a little bit of background. I would like every one of you to think about taking the ConOps 4 class, and we're taking a look at how the whole disaster operation, the DRO, works together, because you need to understand that. Matt said, you know, your point of contacts. Well, first of all, you now have a situation of once you're deployed, even a local disaster, if it's a DRO, you can go to your phone, and through volunteer connection, you can get the IAP. That's where the people's phone numbers are. But you have to understand that structure. So I urge you to take as much training and pick anybody's brains that you can, and also go out on national DROs to see how it works and how it fits together, how the pieces work. So I'll stop at this point and ask if anybody has any questions. Hearing
I'm
none.
not seeing anything in the chat, so.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just take a minute here and do what I do best, war stories. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Katrina and the big problems with Katrina. And Matt, at any time you're ready to take off from this, we can back out of it. But I was on the ground for the landfall of Katrina. And the day before Katrina, just to give you an idea of how stretched or stretched out of shape we can be, at 10 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday before Katrina arrived, I was called on a national phone call, and on that call was Joe Becker, who was the Vice President for Operations and Disaster Operations and Logistics. And he said that he had just met with Mr. Brown, the head of FEMA, and they explained what they thought Katrina was going to be. All of the studies talked about how many thousands were going to be homeless, how many thousands were going to be dead. And basically, Joe Becker said, we can't handle this. We're not going to be able to do this. Eventually we will. And eventually we did. But during that first 48 hours, the biggest situation was pointed out by the press is, why isn't the Red Cross in New Orleans? There was nobody in New Orleans. We couldn't get into New Orleans. Actually, the head of the Red Cross chapter in New Orleans, the disaster officer, as Katrina came in, resigned. Every employee of the chapter lost their homes, and most of the volunteers were evacuated. So it was almost a week before we could get into there. So on big events like that, the first 48 hours is going to be chaos, and you're going to take those questions. I'd like to say you're going to be able to run around and take pictures of this and that and whatever. It ain't happening. You ain't going to be able to move. We got into Mississippi 4 days after Katrina for the first time. 4 days after Katrina, we got into Mississippi. Now, we were on the ground in Alabama. We were on the ground in Jacksonville, Mississippi. But down in the area, you couldn't travel. You couldn't go 100 feet without a power line being down. So a lot of the stuff, it's nice. Wherever you are, you are. There's an old joke in the Red Cross. I don't know if anybody on the group wants to pipe in. But can you tell me, according to the Red Cross official source, how can we tell how bad a hurricane's going to be? Anybody want to give me an answer to that? Matt, do you know the answer to that?
I actually don't think I've heard this one.
Okay. It's very simple. It's going to be terrible wherever Jim Cantore is. It's an old joke with the Red Cross. If Jim Cantore's there, you want to be in the other state. So that's the story of Katrina, is the sheer size. And to just give you an idea of what the response was to Katrina in the end, by the second week of Katrina, We were actually, all of the chapters in the United States were taking people in at 8 in the morning, giving them a 3-hour class they weren't background investigations in those days, and we're sending them home at 5 o'clock with a ticket for the next day and a mission card with funds on it and shipping them down there. There used to be a joke about the Red Cross that we were using the mirror test for people, and somebody said, "What's that?" I said, "They came and they volunteered and they could breathe on the mirror and it fogged up. We sent them." And that went on for months. So that's how these big events happen. Gustav's kind of an interesting one too. This is where the Red Cross got everybody out front of it. We were out front. We had everybody in place. We were ready to do what we were going to do. And if you look at the track, everything was wonderful. And so what they did was they went in and they actually set up our headquarters the day before Gustav arrived. And we had all of our people on the ground, all of our experienced managers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. At 9 o'clock the night before Gustav came ashore, we were all sent home to our shelters. We were all in staff shelters. And Gustav came ashore and it went right through Baton Rouge. We were without power for 3 days. We couldn't get stuff in there. We were there, and we had shelters set up, but a major operation has to have a logistical backbone in it too. And so just because we have people there doesn't mean we can get food for them, doesn't mean we can get stuff. So Gustav was a case where they put everybody on the ground up front and they made a miscalculation and the storm went right where the Red Cross was. This is Joplin. Joplin is very sad in that it's very sad. The sad part of this story is the number of people that were lost. The positive point of this story is the fact that they didn't lose as many people as they could have. For those of you who don't know the story of Joplin, Joplin, Missouri hit at 5:15 in the evening. The entire city was at the high school graduation. The good news was they didn't hold the high school graduation at the high school because the high school was completely destroyed. But they held it in a spot at the Civic Center, 4 blocks from the path of this tornado. And they actually, if it hadn't been for the fact that they had a tornado shelter in the basement of the Civic Center, these folks had just walked out when the sirens went off and they went right back in. If it had been a normal Sunday afternoon, that red area you see, everybody in there would have been killed. It was that quick. Superstorm Sandy. Storm of the century in some ways. I don't know if anybody knows it, but in 2012, the U.S. Weather Service put out a notice of the 5 most overdue places in the United States for a hurricane. And the number 5 was Savannah, Georgia. Number 4 was Tampa, St. Pete. Number 3 was New York City. And they knew that if they got a Category 3, and remember, Superstorm Sandy was a Category 4 before it hit land, but it changed because of its classification. But they said that it would take at least 2 years to get New York back up and running. And in fact, the flooding of the subways, they said they didn't know if they could ever bring the subways back. Again, another anecdotal story is that the head of the subway system sent maintenance crews down into the subways, and the subway switch boxes in the New York subways were built in the late 1890s, and there's no company that makes them. And they went down there and they opened the switch boxes up and sprayed them with motor oil and left them. And of course, they flooded Battery Park and the end of that line completely flooded. And if they hadn't done that, it would have been 2 years before they got it back up, but they were able to go in and clean the oil off once the water receded and bring the system up. But Superstorm Sandy was a superstorm also because of the politics of it. For example, factually damage was all over New York, but there was major damage in Manhattan. In fact, I was there for 144 days. When I left, the financial district still was running off of generators, or running 25 and 30-story buildings off of generators parked in the streets. But the mayor did not want any Red Cross vehicles inside Manhattan. And so we couldn't even bring an Irv in for a meeting because of the politics, because for the mayor's thoughts, Red Cross in Manhattan means means New York is destroyed. So sometimes during that first 48 hours, you'll run into this kind of stuff. Hurricane Harvey. Well, this is my favorite. I spent 11 weeks on Hurricane Harvey. I arrived at 12 noon the day before Harvey hit. At 6 the next morning, I waded through 3.5 feet of water to get to the Red Cross office, which was next door to my hotel. We actually had a lot of people in place. We had done a real good ramp up, and then the storm came in and lasted so long that Houston was totally cut out. There was no access for 3 days. For 3 days, we took every volunteer we had, and we put them. Actually, I can remember the night Harvey hit. We actually were putting Red Cross volunteers in the back of high-wheel dump trucks and taking them through standing water to shelters, and we left them there for 4 days, running the shelters. We fed them and stuff like that, but we couldn't get them out. We couldn't get the people out of the shelters. So it was a major disaster. Also, something that's kind of a funny story, but it's the mother of invention. And a lot of times on disaster relief operations, somebody comes up with a great idea. Well, we were landing helicopters in a mud lot to the north of the parking lot in the chapter. And they were coming in at night because the blood bank was there. And we were taking and transferring Coast Guard helicopters. Blood is being taken to outlying hospitals in different locations. And all of a sudden, we had a bunch of policemen there. And one of the policemen comes up and says, "Why did you guys request the flares?" And my job was liaison with the police. I said, "I didn't request any flares." Well, he says, "You've got a volunteer that's going around and collecting all the flares out of the police cars." So I went and found this guy, and he had all the flares. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, they're landing helicopters here. We're going to stand out there with flares and direct them in." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you have any understanding what night vision glasses are and what a flare will do to those pilots?" So kind of a cute story, but during that first 48 hours, stuff happens, good stuff and bad stuff. Finally, the lava flow here. I'm going to be brutally honest. The Red Cross failed here in the lava flow for the first 48 hours. It didn't fail because of lack of planning. It failed because the person who was directing it had no clue of what they were doing. And they got so muddled down that they quit communications with all of the other folks. And so you had people in shelters and nobody was directing them. The good news was after 3 days, National started to come in. I came in on Sunday, people were coming in, and we quickly turned that around. But when I walked in on Sunday night, the local government officials were refusing to even talk to the Red Cross people and were threatening to throw them out of the shelter. And it wasn't their fault, it was the management's fault. I took this job for the very purpose of fixing that. And I think we have it fixed now. But there's an example of something that happens like right now. And if you don't have qualified people, if you don't have skilled leaders, it can go south very quickly. Anyhow. And that's it. Matt, it's back to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of the war stories. I love hearing about those. It's great just because Yes, like I said at the top of this, I feel like I can give you some idea of what's kind of expected in a general sense, and then I wanted to make sure that Marty could tell you here's what really happens. So thank you so much for that. And I want to open it up to everybody right now. Are there any questions? Anything that you'd like to ask me or Marty about? Right. If not, well, oh, I see a hand up. James.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we're still under the instruction to not give out shelter information. A while back, we were told we can link to the county's webpage, but not to put out anything on our own for that.
Good question. That is always kind of a living thing, I feel like. The list of shelters I know I've published it. You want that information out there. I think the important part is how you frame the message, because the way it's done locally, and correct me on any of this if I'm wrong, Marty, but basically the county government dictates what's going to be a shelter, which shelters open, how many of them open, everything like that. Locally, the Red Cross, the volunteers, staffs those shelters, and we'll offer our services and again, the client confidentiality and everything like that. So we staff them, but the official decision, anything on that level or claiming the shelters, that is all the government. We can say shelters are located here, 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 and here. And then, include whatever information you can be on that. Like Red Cross is staffing the shelters at A, B, and C.
The standard is don't speak to something you don't know the answer to. That's always the standard for anybody, but for you guys, it's a little different. First of all, the shelters are designated by the counties. Opening and closing of them is in conjunction with us, but it's designated by them. Officially, the Red Cross only has one count a day of the shelters, and that's at midnight. So you really don't have access to how many people are in the shelter. Even the county doesn't have that. It's, you could say, well, I've talked to the shelter manager and they said, well, we're about half full. Okay, that's half full. I mean, whatever. But the official counts are once a day at midnight. There's heads on beds. And that's just the official standard from the Red Cross of how many people we have. So it's not the kind of thing where you can walk in the middle of a shelter and ask somebody, can I get a count of the number of people you have registered? They're not going to have the time to do it, and it's not an official Red Cross count. So if you're asking, again, general information, yeah, we've got a lot of people there. Yeah, we're servicing them. The Humane Society's there. Salvation Army's feeding them and that kind of stuff. When you start getting the actual counts and number of people in there, I would defer to the fact the Red Cross counts them once a night. We put it out and defer to that question. If it was posed to me standing out in front of the shelter, I mean, you can look around and see what it looks like, but we don't gather that information and disseminate it through any kind of press office or anything like that normally. At least during the first 48 hours, might be later.
Thank you. I see one more hand up. Den.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I actually I had my hand up for something else, but just a thing on I was out twice with the Hawaii volcanoes, and I think I was probably the only person who actually went out into the field and counted every single person and dog and whatever with a security officer. I think it took me over an hour. And it was because you know how they always want a count of everybody in the shelter twice a day. And I came back and I said, that is an impossibility. I mean, we had people coming and going and whatever, but I actually did a count, and I think I was the only one. And then they said, "Okay, let's just use Den's numbers." But yeah, it's impossible to know because you got people coming and going. And I agree. Just leave that to somebody else because it's never going to be absolutely accurate. But the reason I had my hand up was because I've been here in Maui for 17 years, and I moved here from Houston, Texas, and I joined the Red Cross, and all they could do was give me, they said I could do lifeguarding or I could transport people. So I was really frustrated. So when I came here to, in I guess 2005 for Katrina, I was just like, please send us out. Please send us out. We were all ready to go out. I went out actually as a mental health worker, even though I'm a nurse, and they wouldn't let us go. They said, "Oh, it's too expensive to send people from Hawaii." And then I found out later that they were paying people from the mainland. It actually cost more money for the Red Cross to send them than people from Hawaii. And then, of course, after that, they let us go, but it was ridiculous. They wouldn't let us volunteer because they said we can't take, we can't pay for people from Hawaii to go to Katrina. And we eventually did get there, but at the tail end.
Right,
I
right.
I'll be happy to comment on that. And there's several
Mm.
things you need to be aware of for deployment.
Yeah.
First of all, depends on how high you are in the organization and what role you have. They may spend more. I've only been in 22 years or 20 years. I've only been once told it was too expensive, and then 2 days later they sent me. But then I was at a manager's level in there. A couple things, and I saw something last week where they were saying they would not send anybody to Kentucky if it was more than $900 from Hawaii. Um, Understand we're in a different world than we were in Katrina. During Katrina, you talked about episodic disasters. We now talk about chronic disasters. One of the things that happens for our volunteers is because we're in Hawaii, we get our division, the Pacific Division, because of the forest fires, gets what they call fenced. What that means is they may need people in Louisiana for hurricane, whatever the last one was, but they won't send anybody from California because they're going to need you for the fires. And I was on a call on Tuesday, and they announced that they expect to be in full level 5 operations in the state of California, Oregon, and Washington till Thanksgiving or Christmas. So one of the things about being sent, there always was for years, Hawaii was too expensive. Now we don't have enough people. They'll make do. There are ways around it, but it has happened in the past, and it did happen during Katrina. But there's also an initiative this year for the disaster cycle services people to get more people promoted and qualified so they can go on national disasters. Well, in order to do that, you have to send them out. So you're going to see more people going out this year. We're going to put more emphasis on that. We're trying to do the training to get them up because you also can't advance. You can't get off the bottom rung unless you go on at least 2 DROs and act as a supervisor and get an evaluation saying you should be promoted. So it really becomes, when they start limiting the dollars, it's based upon what your position is. And for those that don't know, in the Red Cross, a gap, there's something called a gap. It's your group, activity, and position. The group is maybe logistics, mass care. There's 6 of them. Activity is an individual activity underneath that. For example, mine is the LSAP. And then there are 3 levels of positions. One's an SA, one's an SV, and one's a manager. And you're more likely to get up as you go up that chain. They're more likely to spend the money to send an SV than they are to send a service associate. So it's changed. But again, we're an organization that one day it'll be one rule and the next day it'll be another rule because they have to adapt to what's going on in that disaster and that eventuality. But mostly during the year, we'll get fenced. About the middle of next month, we'll be fenced, and we'll only be responding to California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Pacific Islands, Idaho, or Montana. And that's just because the other parts of the United States cover those others because we have what is now chronic disasters.
Yeah, I've been that's kind of been the new guiding principle from even a communications perspective, is just the idea that people need to have redundancies built in of like, okay, who is the person that can step in and seamlessly take your position if you are needed elsewhere. And there is a lot of that going on, and they want to make sure that everybody's cross-trained so that that can happen. Because yeah, it's now it's basically like we like to, and we still use it because it's such a media friendly term, to say disaster season, but that really doesn't exist anymore. There's just a time when it's more likely and less likely, but it's almost always happening now. Okay, so with that, we have gone a couple minutes over, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Unless there are any last minute questions, we can adjourn for this month. I want to say thank you all for joining First Fridays. It's been another very informative one. Thank you again to Marty for coming by and speaking all your experience. I love the war stories. Of course, if you have anything that you would like to bring to the front as far as topics to discuss, especially when it comes to disaster response and communications, the flow of information during the full of a DRO, which is our topic in September, please do feel free to reach out. My contact information and my volunteer engagement lead, Kyoka, we both have our contact information up there. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us. This is being recorded and will be up on YouTube shortly, so be on the watch for that. I'll let everybody know when it's available. And with that, thank you very much. Good evening. Have a wonderful weekend.
Hey, hui ho.